Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to this webinar about case interviewing. We are so excited to be hosting these three Tippie alumni who have graciously agreed to spend some time with us to discuss case interviewing because, as you can imagine, this can be a very intimidating style of interview if you're not prepared. Today's call will start with introductions of our three esteemed alumni, and then we will go right into a discussion. We will leave about 20 to 30 minutes at the end for Q&A, so we welcome you all to chime in at the end with questions in the Q&A box below. For those of you that aren't familiar with case interviews, they're a style of job interview where the applicant is presented on the spot with a challenging business scenario or problem that they must investigate and propose a solution to. The purpose of a case interview is to evaluate the candidate's analytical ability and problem-solving skills by understanding how the applicant thinks and approaches problems. Now to give a quick introduction of myself and my office. My name is Natalie Schreffler. I'm with the Tippie Undergraduate Career Services Office. We're located in W160, right next to Pat's Diner in the Papa John building. We are super excited to be bringing you some great programming and resources around case interviewing this semester. Today we have with us Rita Guzman, who is a 2018 graduate of Tippie, where she studied marketing and earned a certificate in international business and a minor in Portuguese. As a senior enrollment advisor at All Campus in Chicago, Rita builds pipelines for online graduate and certificate programs, providing support to prospective students and creating an inclusive work environment. With a background that includes roles at IES Abroad and Fulbright, Portugal, Rita's expertise spans international education and cross-cultural communication. Next, we have Rachel Langholz, who's a 2017 graduate of Tippie, where she studied finance and economics. Rachel is currently a senior consultant in Deloitte's government and public sector practice, focused on state, local, and healthcare clients. Most recently, she has worked with clients in the healthcare and human services space to create governance models and strategic options for increased investment in workforce development. Prior to consulting, Rachel spent 3 years at BMO Capital Markets in their investment banking division, focused on leveraged finance. Rachel is currently pursuing her MBA at Kellogg with a focus on strategy, policy, and entrepreneurship. And lastly, we have Sydney Alexander, who graduated from Iowa in 2018, receiving dual degrees in management and theater arts. Sydney is currently the Consumer Insights and Analytics Manager for Choice Hotels International, which is one of the world's largest hotel chains, where she conducts consumer research for Choice's 22 hotel brands, loyalty program, and national ad campaigns. Based in the Washington, D.C. area since graduating, Sydney previously spent 3 years at Volkswagen's North American headquarters, where she held roles in marketing, market research, and product strategy. So let's go ahead and kick it off with some questions for our panelists. I would love to hear from all three of you. What is your experience of case interviewing? What was it like? What's the types that you've done, etc.? Rita, let's start with you.
Yeah, so the three types of case studies that I've done, one was actually building a template for prospective graduate program students. So I was tasked with building, kind of like an interview model of what I would ask and why I would ask those questions, and essentially how I would guide students through the pipeline using this template. So that was one. Another one, I did have to develop a flyer for a very specific marketing prompt on this company's website. The company used to do, it seems like, more so third-party matching with parents seeking out college options for their children. So it was essentially marketing their services for a specific deadline and time period they were working off of. And then the third one I had to do, it was kind of a twofold prompt. One was what the fundraising strategy would be for a campaign, and developing that campaign in full and providing kind of the timeline and measurements and metrics for that. And also building a flyer for an event that this organization also does. So very different realms. One was a marketing agency, technically, in education. Another one was the University of Chicago, Illinois, for one of their master's programs. And then the third, which was the presentation, was a mentorship program that's based in Chicago. So 3 different types of companies and 3 different types of cases.
Awesome, thank you. Rachel, tell us about your experience.
Absolutely. I've done a couple case interviews as well, including one recently as I'm potentially looking to take on a new role. So happy to quickly talk through both of those. So for my Deloitte consulting interview, I will say we have some online case interactive platforms where you can go in and kind of respond to a business question, and they'll kind of take your answer and provide feedback. So I would say my experience was pretty similar to that in terms of being provided with a question around an organization that was considering expansion and whether or not they should move into a certain market. There was some mental math involved, some analysis, kind of doing that live with the interviewer. I had, kind of a piece of paper and was like working through that with him. And then most recently, looking to take on a strategy role at a healthcare company. I had 2 different case interviews with them, and one was around thinking about how and when and where to expand some of their dialysis clinics in a certain market. There was a quick DCF component of the interview as well. So doing, again, a little more financial analysis, as well as thinking about kind of their market dynamics in terms of what would affect their decision to move in terms of a region. So I was looking at a map, I was looking at capacity of some of their competitors and thinking about what made sense for them. And then also had an hour-long case presentation where I basically took a recent project that I did at Deloitte and presented it to them in terms of my experience, my recommendations to the client, what I would have done differently. So a very unique type of case where I kind of chose the problem that I solved, and they asked me lots of questions as we walked through that. So I feel like no case experience is the same, and always helpful to kind of know what's typical for the specific company that you're interviewing with.
Great, and a quick follow-up, you mentioned you have online resources. Is that internally in Deloitte, the online case prep resources that you're referencing?
Oh, that's external. So I can even just pull that up and drop the link into the chat if it'll work in this type of webinar format so everyone can access it. It's pretty interactive, and they give you quick feedback when you submit your results and responses.
Great, thank you. Sydney, how about you?
Yeah, so for all 3 final rounds that I had as I was interviewing for roles my senior year at Tippie, I had case interviews all a little bit different. So one was for Wayfair. That was pretty calculation heavy. It was about inventory and balancing that with search engine optimization. That one was in person, on the fly. They have the papers printed out for you. You have a little scratch pad, and that is about it. That one was probably the most intimidating because I'd never done something in that kind of realm before. Another one I had was for Abercrombie and Fitch. That one was definitely the most fun. They showed you all of their products that they were going to be launching in their spring line, and you essentially had to, using data and understanding trends and about the industry, decide which key products you would require stores to show in their physical storefront, and then explain why those were the products you chose. And then the final one was for Volkswagen, which is where and just really quick on Abercrombie, that one was a take-home one, so that was a little bit different. And then I had a Zoom call where I actually presented my findings and kind of why I chose what I did. And then my last one at Volkswagen, that was in person on the spot, but it was a group case study. So there was about 5 of us, which was kind of a unique environment, making sure that you're balancing having a role and contributing, but not taking over, which was very valuable and difficult to do during the interview process. And for that one, we had to use customer data to essentially design a Super Bowl ad that would appeal to the target audiences that Volkswagen was trying to get new orders from. So that's a little bit about my experience. Again, some were in person, some virtually, some group, individually. So again, like Rachel said, it can just really depend on the company.
Yeah, it's so helpful to hear the 3 of you had such pretty wildly different case interview experiences, and it still, it sounds like they were still really applicable and helpful to help you understand the job at hand. What would you say, were there resources that you wish you had had, or kind of preparation materials that you maybe did use or wish that you had used that you just kind of had to figure out on your own? Rachel, let's start with you.
Perfect. Happy to jump in. Yeah, I would say I didn't have a ton of time. I'm thinking back to my Deloitte experience, kind of found out with maybe a week or two notice of the interview and kind of started researching what that was like. I would say there are some phenomenal books out there, kind of like Case in Point or Case Interview Secrets are two good ones. But I would also say the best type of practice, for me at least, and in the format I was preparing for, was either watching YouTube videos of people actually working through cases to give me kind of tips on how people would best articulate their responses, but also just practicing with friends, former, colleagues, students, alumni, even some people at Deloitte who are willing to prep with me. So I would just say doing that live is the best type of practice you can have, and then getting feedback from the person you're practicing with. So I would say those are kind of some strategies that I used.
Thank you. How about you, Rita?
I would say, I guess, to add to what Rachel asked, I try to do a specific research as possible into the company and the industry that I was looking to get into. And like Rachel mentioned, like definitely like testing out, let's say, whether or not your flyer is achieving the message that is answering the prompt. Or let's say if it was like the interview template, does this conversation flow and does this make sense for a prospective student? Or let's say in the fundraising campaign, which is a lot more, it was a lot different than the other two as well. Does the timeline make sense to scale given what I knew? I was fortunate that I had more insight because I was a mentor with that organization, so I knew a little bit about their timeline, but trying to find like their financial reports, because they're a public nonprofit, they have to provide that, and seeing, where they were currently at and potentially where this campaign could lead. So yeah, I'm trying to do a lot more, let's say, specific research to the company, their market, and their target audience, especially because they were three very different ones.
Thank you. Sydney, how about you?
Yeah, totally echo what Rita and Rachel both said. And additionally, kind of touching on what Rachel said before, there are so many great resources online. I did not know Deloitte had one that actually give you feedback. That's pretty cool. But there are tons of great practice prompts on several different of the big consulting firms. And those are super useful. Again, just practicing with a friend, but just really getting comfortable with the kind of questions that you're going to be asked and preparing yourself for how your process and kind of how you attack the case interview style.
Great. That's great advice. It sounds like you've all had very different formats, but in your experience, how would you describe the actual format of your case interview experiences, whether it was in real time or like a multi-day process, kind of start to finish? What would you say was a typical format? Sydney, let's start with you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I haven't really had a typical format. I've had take home, on the fly, individual, group. Sometimes you can use the internet, sometimes you just have a scratch pad. I would say the two biggest commonalities: one, I've always had data or charts to go off of that I need to base my analysis off of. I've never had something where they just kind of throw you to the wolves. They always give you multiple kind of facts and figures to base your answers off of. And I personally have always had to create a presentation, or at least discuss my key findings. So that's something that's you always have to make sure to kind of balance between, making sure you have time to actually do your analysis, but also that you're able to effectively communicate and share your process.
Thank you. Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I might just speak to the Deloitte one specifically, as I think it might be most relevant to students here. I would say, so for me, it was during COVID. So it was fully remote. Like 5 minutes before, like we had hopped on the call, the interviewer had emailed me just a Word document that had, information around like this finance transformation problem around like the payroll costs and the upfront investment and automation statistics and things like that, as well as kind of the qualitative summary of the business problem. And so he walked through it, but then I had a copy on my end and then just had, pencil and paper to kind of talk him through that. And again, it was all on Zoom. So just kind of walking him through, answering his questions. So that was a live experience that I feel like is typical, at least in kind of consulting processes. Hopefully now more students are getting to do that in person, but I'm sure it still varies.
Rita, how about you?
Yeah, so for me, I'd say 2 out of the 3 are very vague in terms of the prompt. It was kind of like build this template for, one was for parents seeking our services. That was all they kind of gave me, and create a flyer, run with it. So I had kind of creative freedom. The other one that was also pretty vague was the graduate admissions template one. That one, I don't think I was even given like a student profile. So that was where, research definitely helped with that. But that was a lot more like, how would you approach interviewing prospective students? Kind of do your own thing. The third PowerPoint and flyer presentation with Chicago Scholars, that was a lot more in depth, where they gave me, the who, why, what, and a little bit of guidance on the timeline expected. And especially for the flyer, I had to produce in the second prompt what the type of event was based on things that they were already doing. So that was kind of the timeline. One of them was during COVID, so that was virtually, but the graduate admissions template and then the presentation with the flyer, those are both in person. So I was in front of a panel of interviewers presenting my findings and my outreach.
Sounds stressful.
It actually wasn't that bad.
Okay,
I didn't think
good.
it was that bad, but
Well, on that note, how would you say you managed the more stressful or unforeseen aspects of these case interviews, especially in like these group panel settings or things that were unexpected? What was your kind of approach? Rita, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, sure. I'll take the Chicago Scholars one just because that one was a lot more involved, I'd say. I will say, so I think what was interesting, the feedback that I got was that they were blown away by my presentation because they were not expecting for me to go as in depth or as detailed with the step-by-step of the fundraising campaign. So I gave them a lot to work off of, and the feedback they gave me is like, well, like these are great. We don't have that capacity, so we'd have to scale a lot of what you suggested. So I guess maybe I should have looked a little bit more into their organization's I don't know, their management of funds. But to be honest, I think that was actually good feedback, because they were not expecting that much, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I think because I tried to give as much context and as detailed as possible, that definitely helped. It did end up leading to an offer. I didn't accept for other reasons, but I think they were very impressed at how I tried to put myself in the shoes of everybody that was involved and who it would take to get to some of these touch points, or drafting campaign messaging and who exactly should be receiving what and when. So all that to say, I mean, I probably because I was so confident, and I was pleasantly surprised that they're like, wow, this is great. This is way more than we thought you were going to produce or put out there. I think that definitely helped. And even with the, let's say, the admissions template one, I think they too were also really impressed that I was digging into very deep questions about like prospective students' motivation. I come from a background in admissions anyway, so it's kind of like, okay, what are things that prospective students need to know? And yeah, in true marketing major form, it's like thinking like, how would your target audience react to what you're putting out, or what are you trying to influence them to do? So maybe because I think the self-confidence helped. I think that's why I wasn't really fazed by the panel interviews, because I was very sure, and I had points to back up why I was doing the things that I was showing.
So it kind of just sounds like if you prepare very well, that's a big way to reduce your stress going into it.
Yes.
Sydney, how about you? Oh, go ahead.
Also, I was just going to quickly mention too, even like, Rachel and Sydney have mentioned Tippie. I love Tippie because there are a lot of great people, higher level people that you can kind of, test what you're producing to. So Rachel's tool is great. I would say if you have people that that are in the similar industry, maybe even same company, depending where you're at, it doesn't hurt at all to run through what you've produced with them. So that also helps, especially for the two more higher ed related or education related industries. I did.
Sure. Thank you. Sydney, how about you managing the kind of stress or unforeseen aspects?
Yeah, for one, I would say, regardless of the kind of setting for case interviews, knowing that there isn't necessarily going to be a right answer and that they're really just trying to understand the way you think and your process. That was something that I always had to keep in mind, not spend too much time getting really stuck on one thing, as long as I was able to back up, how I got to that point. For the on the fly ones, knowing that the discomfort will end, that you deserve to be there, that you've made it to that point for a reason. And if you are really hating the case interview you're working on, maybe that is a blessing in disguise, that might not be the best role for you. But I think sometimes they can be really helpful in showing, wow, this is really interesting. This is something I'm really enjoying. I think I would really benefit from taking this role. And then in group settings, or when you have a panel, I think it's really important to make sure that you have a role when you're in those group settings, whether you be creating the presentation or brainstorming ideas. I know for one case interview I had that was in a group setting, they actually had people walking around taking notes on how we work together, because that was kind of part of the interview as well. So just making sure that you don't look out of the loop in a group situation, that you're balancing getting your ideas in there and being heard, but also serving as a team player as well. So I think those are the biggest things in how I tried to manage those stressful moments.
Great advice. Rachel, how about you?
Absolutely. I would say, just speaking to the situations when you're presented with a live problem to solve, information is given to you and you're expected to react and respond pretty quickly and digest information. I would say something that's always helpful for me is asking those clarifying questions and kind of talking through your thought process out loud. I think they want to hear how you're thinking and processing information versus kind of going dark and not really saying anything, or walking them through how you're thinking about it. I think too, if it's probably a lot of information, even just asking for a moment to collect your thoughts, taking a pause is always fine, letting them know you're jotting some notes down. I think just kind of articulating your process and how you're working through that is always helpful.
Thank you. And it's kind of related. We just got a question in from Brooke saying, even if you do all of the research you possibly can, how should you approach answering a question you aren't sure about or you don't know the exact answer to, or maybe the interviewer asked a question you simply were not prepared for? What I'm kind of hearing is just talk them through your thought process, even if you don't have the right answer. But any more advice on how to do that in real time under this pressure situation?
I could jump in just as a follow-up there. I would say there's probably going to be many instances where you, again, if it's information that's presented to you on the fly, it's kind of one thing if you have time weeks in advance to prepare something. Again, there's still unique challenges there. But in the moment, I think, speaking from a consulting perspective, where we love frameworks, I think if you can bring a couple frameworks to mind, it's kind of where some of these books are useful. It's helpful to respond in an organized, logical manner, and you can ideally respond to any problem despite the industry or type of, whether it's technology, strategy, human capital, with some type of high level framework and kind of structure your answers in that way. So again, some of those books I mentioned, which we can follow up with, have useful frameworks that you can really apply to any type of problem.
Thank you. Rita, how about you? Anything to add?
I think what Rachel mentioned was great. Yeah, definitely don't be afraid to take a pause, and even like just thinking how I work daily in admissions. If someone asks me something very specific that I'm not sure about, yes, that I will get back to you. But in this scenario, I would answer that with how I would exactly look up or search that for that information, especially if I'm not quite sure. So I would kind of work about, that would be my workaround, is like, I'm not quite sure of that. However, here is what I would do to obtain an answer.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with any kind of public speaking or when you're kind of put on the spot, you're perceiving time as moving so much faster than it actually is. And so you might feel like you have to speak or have to jump in. And so I think it's really great advice that Rachel gave, whether you need to ask for a moment or just start talking, even if it just makes you feel like you're buying yourself some time, that just really helps with the nerves and the stressful moments in itself.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We've got another question from Aaron. Says, when I was preparing for my case interview, I had a lot of people emphasize how important it is to make it a two-way conversation between the interviewer and interviewee, as Rachel mentioned. What kind of questions do case interviewers want to hear? Can you give some examples? Rachel, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think just clarifying questions around the problem statement. I mean, I think you can kind of ask additional assumptions like, do you think we know the population here? Or how long has your competitor been in the market? Again, I think questions that might help you to respond in a more detailed and thoughtful manner. So kind of thinking about what are my information gaps that I might still be wondering, are there other costs associated with this investment I should be aware of? And again, typically they're going to be giving you the information that you need. And so I would say just questions that are maybe a little more qualitative, things that can help structure your thought process. And again, just a little bit more on buying your time and helping you to kind of have a more thoughtful response.
Thank you. Sydney, how about you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me in case studies was the assumptions. So asking those clarifying questions, but if they're not able to clarify or you have a take-home prompt, knowing that you'll have to make assumptions. They don't expect you to know everything, and you don't want to spend too much time just researching one minor detail. So it's absolutely okay, and you should make assumptions. You probably will have to, as long as you call that out. I assumed that this was the three brands you showed me were the only brands in the industry, and I assumed that the population was XYZ, and I assumed we were only looking at the United States or things like that. Those will absolutely just keep your momentum going, and allow you to manage your time more effectively.
Rita, how about you? Anything to add?
No, I mean, definitely the clarifying question, because what Sydney mentioned, especially with the Chicago Scholars presentation, is what I had to do, especially because I had assumed one thing, especially when it came to scale. But yeah, in that case, it was clarifying, like, do you mind sharing what your actual goal was? How would this role work in tandem with these departments, as I had kind of built this out this way, but how in actuality, especially for scaling, how would that work? And then they kind of turned into kind of reworking even my presentation a little bit to kind of fit then what they were describing. So it became very much two-way, because it was like, okay, here's how this would actually work based on what you just told me. So yeah, clarifying questions, especially, yeah, what Rachel said, knowledge gaps.
Yep, very helpful. We got a question from Eva. Is there anything that you would absolutely should not do as an applicant in a case interview? What are some strategies for recovering or getting back on track if you realize you've made a mistake? Sydney, let's start with you.
That is a really great question. I think for one, if you've made a mistake, you can absolutely address it. Like, oh, I noticed that I was using this calculation. I was doing that because of XYZ, but now I've re-noticed, this detail. Again, just walking through that process and exactly what you're noticing, what you're taking in. Again, they want to be a part of your brainstorming and your thought process. And so if you notice something that's going to get you back on track, you should absolutely bring that up. The interviewer wants you to do well. I mean, the only thing that is more uncomfortable than struggling is watching somebody struggle. And so they don't want to see you fail. So if you make a mistake and you have the ability to bounce back and get back on track, then you should absolutely take the opportunity to do so. They're not gonna, grade you down or mismark you because you made a mistake that you caught. I think that shows that you're resilient and that you did have the attention to detail. And again, you are in a high pressure situation. So.
Thank you. That's a good reminder that the interviewer is like rooting for you in the process. That's good.
Absolutely.
Rita, how about you?
I will say, especially prepare as much as you can, especially. So I'm just thinking of the first one I read, which was the marketing flyer for that ed tech, searching for college roles. I think I focused maybe a little bit on too much, like, I was focusing too much on what the flyer looked like. And then in terms of a lot of the why, like, why did you decide to do this with that? Because it looks like nice doesn't necessarily cut it all the time. And kind of I should have done, I think, a little bit more market research specifically, especially with parent concerns. So, I mean, I didn't bomb it, but I think it could have gone better had I think, kind of revisited, basic marketing concepts. I think because I hadn't been in it for a while, I was like, oh, they just want me to design something. That was not the only thing they wanted me to do. They wanted to know a lot more details about, like, why I had designed it the way I did. So, what you don't want to do is, kind of flounder and bomb. That's why the confidence and practicing that we keep stressing is going to be helpful.
I can jump in and just maybe repeat something that was mentioned before, but just not sitting there in like this silent panic, I feel like is probably, again, when there's a lot of information to take in, and I think you can acknowledge that, oh, there's a lot of information here. I might just take a minute and, walk through this, the details you presented or something like that. Even just acknowledging that, and giving kind of a voice to kind of your thought process. And I think that's, again, reiterating why I did glean a lot from a couple of these books to help prep for cases, but I think where you really grow in your ability to succeed at cases is the application of that information and practicing it live with another human or maybe an AI like chatbot now. I'm sure they have those now. But just thinking about talking it out loud and putting yourself in kind of a high pressure situation. I think people have also said they'll put themselves on a timer and then also just walk through it out loud, because when you're put under this time pressure, you're kind of trying to simulate what that's like in person. So I would say, even if you're by yourself, just practicing that. And I think what Sydney mentioned earlier, it feels like time is just evaporating. But in reality, if you start getting a sense of, okay, that was 3 minutes, that felt a lot longer, I practiced this, you can really help set yourself up for success when you're doing it in real life.
Great, thank you. Is it common to receive feedback after case interviews? And if so, have you? What was it like? Did it affect the way you approached it the next time? Rachel, let's start with you.
I don't know if it's common to receive feedback. I think in the middle of, I think there's questions and you might get some pushback or, oh, well, why, I think Sydney might have mentioned too, like, what were your assumptions? I think if you're articulating that, or if you notice a mistake, maybe you're kind of catching something before they might tell you, oh, that's not quite right. Or, so I think it depends even on how it's going. They might be responding to you in real time or kind of asking you to like check your math or check your work and kind of be working through that. I think after the fact, that's probably not as common. I think the feedback that you moved on to the next round or received your offer is probably the most common type of feedback. If you did a good enough job, that's kind of how I've experienced it in the past, but really curious what Rita and Sydney have experienced.
Yeah, Sydney, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is I've shared, you know, are there any considerations that I didn't take into account that you feel like would drastically change the outcome of this analysis, which is kind of a quick way to get very simple feedback. But like Rachel said, I don't know if it's super common to get feedback following a case interview. Maybe just a couple comments here or there, or if afterwards they say, oh yeah, I would agree with that, or I was impressed you picked up on that. But I wouldn't say full-fledged formal feedback, but there are ways that you can get some insights into things that you could work on, or things that you did a great job in delivering on.
So for mine, 2 out of the 3 did provide more feedback. Not the marketing flyer one. That one I got nothing. But especially the Chicago Scholars presentation, that's how then it came about. Like, oh, these are great ideas, but we would need to scale this back because this is how we actually function in these departments. So that one I got feedback, I think, and more context on the organization itself and how the role would play out. And then even for the template, a little bit of the same thing, different type of scaling for their admissions. And I guess, scaling back in that case too, their outreach strategy. So it was feedback, but I think it was more in the lines of like, well, this is great, but we want you to know this is in actuality how this would work and how we would anticipate like this prompt playing in. So 2 out of the 3.
Thank you. Can you provide examples of how case interview skills are directly applicable to your current job or previous jobs you've had? And maybe not even the case interview for the job that you got from it, but just in general, how they might be helpful in just the job search in general. Rita, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, definitely problem solving and analytical skills, especially, well, they do give, like everybody's alluding to, really great insight into what the role actually would do. And kind of, I think also what the expectations of the role would be. So like, developing a full-fledged fundraising campaign, even though I had gone the full-fledged route, it was very helpful to see that was exactly what that role would be doing, and even doing outreach and getting to play back into creative side. So yeah, it was directly related to the roles that I was interviewing for. And I think even in my current position, I mean, I still do this of thinking in putting myself in the shoes of like who the target is. And even as I'm looking to transition elsewhere too, that's kind of the key role in thinking like, okay, where else could we improve and do this based on, this potential issue in your market or organization. So I found them to be very helpful.
Great, that's good to know. Sydney, how about you?
Yeah, so for my current role and for when I was at Volkswagen, I had case studies for each that worked with target customer data. So everything from demographics, psychographics, media usage, shopping habits, and kind of had to distill this data into key themes to present for my case interview. And that's exactly what I did in my role at Volkswagen and now today, working through that kind of information to provide insights to our marketing team. So it was something that while I was doing it, I really enjoyed. I thought it was fascinating to use data, but to give our customer, make them kind of seem real, provide some color commentary. So it was something that I kind of enjoyed, mirroring the science and the art aspects. So again, as Rita said, if it's something you enjoy doing, and it's also just like a great kind of sneak peek of what you'd be doing in the role as well.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, we did jump in. I think at least in consulting, it's very typical to have very vague, kind of ambiguous asks from clients. And so I feel like a case interview is a good example and kind of experience of these cases that you will be working on with clients all the time. And so I think it is good practice that you have, a problem or kind of a project to solve. Here's the information that we have up front. There's a lot of unknowns. How are you going to navigate those unknowns? What research can you do? What assumptions can you make? So I would say, while of course you hopefully will get a lot more data and information from the client, and of course have access to a lot more information when you're working on real client projects, I think case studies do help to simulate aspects of that. And I think just being comfortable with navigating ambiguity is a big component to kind of succeeding on client projects.
Great. We have a question in from Brooke. I think it's kind of a follow-up on the questions to ask the interviewer. If you have questions during a take-home case, should you get in touch with the interviewer ahead of time or just bring them to the interview? Sydney, let's start with you.
Yeah, so usually you'll be in contact with somebody from HR. It might not be the hiring manager yet that has directly given you the case study, or it could be. They probably purposefully have not given you every snippet of information. You can always ask, it's always worth a try. But again, I think that's when making those key assumptions and just explaining that why you chose to make the assumptions you did based off the information you were given is the best way to attack that. I think that you can always ask those questions during, but you should at least have come prepared, having already made assumptions and having done the work in a certain way.
Great. Rachel, how about you?
I don't think I have anything to add. I think Sydney nailed that response.
Great. Rita, anything?
I've actually kind of waited more so, well, yeah, making assumptions and having backup, but then I always, good practice, you always come with questions to interviews. So I did save a lot of those for the conversational piece at the end. Yeah, especially if they're like, what questions do you have? And then I go through my list. Yeah.
Great. We have an anonymous question. When they ask you to design something, do they indicate what softwares they want you to use, or do you just create a mock-up on paper? Rachel, let's start with you.
I feel like Rita probably has the best experience here, but for me, I've just always had them in PowerPoint. So I've done a couple take-home cases and like using Excel to do analysis, but mine have not been super design or kind of more around like the marketing side. So I would say just given the analysis and kind of presenting like this business case has always been in PowerPoint. And usually they did specify that that was kind of the expectation.
Rita, how about you?
Yeah, so in each of the prompts, they didn't tell me specifically what resources I had to use, like software-wise. So I went off of, PowerPoint and then Canva. If anybody's familiar with Canva, it's great and free. That's what I use to design, especially a lot of the flyers, maybe even some of the designs like within the PowerPoints. But yeah, I wasn't told, but Canva's great. If anyone's familiar with Canva, if you're doing design, you need something free, Canva.
Great. Sydney, anything to add?
Yeah, similar to Rachel, mine have always just been in PowerPoint as well. I think as long as you're, utilizing their colors, just like small things like that show that you researched and you cared. That has always been the biggest thing in my experience, at least.
Great. Well, I welcome the audience to post any other questions and get your specific question answered while we have these panelists here. One other question I would have is, how did you change your approach as you got more experience? Or like, if you can compare your very first one when you felt, maybe you had no idea what you were doing compared to the most recent one where you landed the job. What was your approach, if anything different? What resources did you know about that you wish you had known previously, etc.? Rita, let's start with you.
Yeah, so definitely an improvement from the first go around with the marketing position to the last one I did, which was the Chicago Scholars PowerPoint. I think definitely being as in depth as you can into the perspectives of the prompt and trying to see who that prompt would impact and asking yourself the who, what, why, where, and as much detail as possible. Definitely having more details than not benefited me. Like in that case, I did end up getting an offer because of how thorough I was, and they surprisingly hadn't expected me to go that in depth. So yeah, I would say putting yourselves in the shoes, like, trying to think of as many questions as you can revolving the prompt, and trying to see if you addressed it that well too.
Great, thank you. Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, I would say just continuing to really look into the industry. I think again, some cases you don't know when you walk in. Is it going to be healthcare? Is it going to be industrials? Like you just don't know. In my most recent experience interviewing for a very specific company in a very specific industry, I think that was very helpful to know kind of the environment that I was walking into. And then in terms of just a practice, I would say one thing I forgot to mention that I think can help is even just recording yourself, whether it's like on a Zoom meeting with yourself or whatever, just because sometimes you don't notice things that you do, or sometimes you kind of watch how you walk through something and it's like instant feedback. So I would say doing that as I was practicing helped me kind of pick up on things that I wanted to usually stop doing and improve on.
Great advice. Sydney, how about you?
Yeah, and running through in the bathroom mirror. That's another one too. I think something for me was just my management of my time and the clock when I am doing a case interview on the fly. As you get more comfortable with them, you'll kind of develop your process. Like, okay, I know that I need more time to do the analytical part than I do the presentation, or vice versa. I know I first want to go through all of the data and charts they've provided. Then start identifying key themes, then figure out which key themes I want to talk about. So you'll kind of start to develop your process as you get more comfortable. But again, it just speaks to the importance of trying out those prompts, those case study interview samples that are available online. Those are just a super great resource to help you get in a rhythm that you're comfortable with. And that way you can really make sure that you keep your momentum going once you're on the fly and doing it for real.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Amy. Have you been in the position of now interviewing others using the case method? Sydney, let's start with you.
Yes. So ours is a take-home one, and it's the same exact one. We haven't gotten very, very creative with it. But as somebody who did the same one 3 years ago, I just always love seeing what people come back with. Sometimes I'm looking in the data and I'm like, wow, that's a really great insight that I never noticed. So again, there's not necessarily always a crystal clear right and wrong answer. Sometimes it'll surprise your interviewer. I say the biggest things that I personally look for is just that you have well-developed, well-thought-out ideas. Again, just making sure I'm aware of your process and that you're able to back them up. I don't care what pieces of data you use. I just think that's just what's most important to me and with the kind of work that I'm in. But it is again, we're rooting for you. We want you to succeed. And it is it's very different being on the other side, but your interviewer remembers what it was to be like in your shoes too. So
Rita, how about you? No?
Not yet. They've been used as templates for other things, but no, I haven't interviewed anyone like that yet.
Rachel, how about you?
I haven't yet. At Deloitte, they still have more like senior members of the firm conduct those. So I would say I'm on a couple of recruiting teams here. So I've done a lot of just prep with students, but not formal interviewing yet.
We have a question specifically for Rachel. How do you recommend researching the industry? How far should you dive into that research if you are aware of what industry you will be working in?
It depends how much time you have. I think there's no limit to how far you want to go into something. Obviously, if you have the capacity. I would say for me, I really enjoy just starting on the company's website and reading some of their press releases and some of like the news articles, especially if it's a publicly traded company, that can be helpful just to get a sense of, okay, what are, some of their recent investments in the market? What are they thinking about with innovation? What are their competitors doing? And so I think doing a bit of a SWOT analysis can be a good first step on kind of like strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. And then thinking about too, where are they looking to go in the future? And sometimes listening to some of their investor presentations can be helpful. And again, just more broader, what's happened in the last 6 months in the industry and how have kind of the top 2 to 3 players kind of responded accordingly. I think that can help, especially if you're in a setting when they're trying to ask you how you would help kind of grow the business. Again, thinking more strategically. So I think doing the research to kind of answer strategic level thinking is helpful. And again, would just say that if you don't have as much visibility, using the frameworks at least to structure your thoughts in a logical way, I think people appreciate that you have some type of methodology to your response. So kind of a method to the madness. And so even if you don't have the industry information, there's still other ways to be kind of intentional and logical in your response.
Thank you. We have a question from William, kind of more of a broad question. How many applications did you all send before hearing back for interviews? Generally in your job search. Rita, if you have a number on the top of your head.
Yeah, I'm going through this now, so I'm like, I'm not gonna lie, it's been a good amount. I would say, especially let's say in the last year, probably submitted like 20 some applications, and out of those 20, and maybe gotten called back for like maybe 5 or 6 in terms of interview rounds. So it is a good amount. I'm not one to apply to like 100 applications for the sake of numbers, because I believe in quality over quantity, but that's kind of where I've been tracking. So like 5 or 6 out of 20 so far.
Okay. Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe just to take another response and approach, I would say it can feel discouraging when you are doing a bunch of like just black hole applications in terms of you see something on LinkedIn or Google and it's interesting. I would say taking that one step further, and I will say I'm the biggest proponent of LinkedIn. I think it's such an underutilized tool, and just finding people at that company you're interested in that have roles that might align with something that you've seen is available. An extra plus, if they are an Iowa alum, they're more likely to talk to you. But I would say I went through a process of even just soul searching, knowing I wanted to do consulting, but not knowing which firm I thought would be the best fit. So even before tossing my hat in the ring, which I certainly put out plenty of applications during COVID when I wanted to make the switch, I spent a lot of time upfront doing a lot of networking just to start getting a sense of, is this firm's culture a fit? Are the projects that they are winning and bidding on, is that, is their level of expertise a good fit with what I'm looking for? So I would say trying to make the firm feel a little smaller and getting those insights. And then many times people can kind of do these internal referrals for you. And that can be helpful to really bump your resume up to the top of the stack when they're really just using kind of these bots to kind of quickly filter and kind of get through their thousands of applications. So I would say trying to go that extra step might be able to help minimize, just to Rita's point, kind of that quantity versus the quality. And if you're focused on really wanting to be considered and known for this role, and kind of putting your self out there and connecting with folks is really helpful.
Sydney, how about you?
Yeah, just want to give a little reminder to my marketing management friends out there, because I know a lot of us who had friends in finance or accounting, and their cycle is so much earlier. Sometimes you have friends that have accepted roles after their sophomore year, and I was feeling so discouraged in the black hole of applications, as Rachel said, my senior year. And then after, again, really researching, really finding what companies or what industries I was interested in working in, it felt like all the interviews hit at the same time in like February, March, after having, not heard back or what felt like a long time. So so it also just is super dependent on the cycle. You have to kind of be patient, be kind to yourself, and again, utilize those networks, utilize the Tippie network, the Iowa network. But also if somebody has your dream role, or works at your dream company, reach out to them. They might not see your message right away, but anytime I've done that, I've no one has ever told me no, or anytime a student has reached out to me, people are always going to be willing to talk to you.
Great, that's super helpful to hear, I'm sure, for students. One last question from an anonymous attendee. Is there anything any of you specifically highlight about your Iowa or Tippie experience that interviewees love to hear? Rita, go ahead.
For sure. So I would highly recommend, if you have any relevant experience, this is even stemming from undergrad, in leadership positions. Let's say you work very closely with a professor in research, and it's, again, relevant to the position. You work with recruiting with different programs on campus, for example. All of that, I know I'm more in like the higher ed side, but even in roles where I haven't been in higher ed, even as a student worker, a lot of us are tasked with like program and people management, whether hopefully you're thinking in that space, because that's what a lot of y'all are doing. And yeah, I would bring that up in interviews to showcase and give more examples of how I've worked in the past, whether it be with other people or especially in the roles of like recruiting, strategy, outreach, things like that. So recruiters do like, as much relevant information, as much relevant experience as possible. From my experience, like even if it's been, I've been graduated for a minute, but all of it was still relevant to the roles I've been doing. So yeah, I'd say I'd suggest pulling that, making sure. I will say, Career Center, feel free to pitch in on this. And me having worked in graduate admissions, I will say you can leave behind that one-page resume after you graduate, because the more context, the better. You can definitely go well beyond a page. Like even as you're graduating, if you're beyond that already, that's awesome. You don't need to just limit yourself. So just my tips.
Sydney, how about you?
Yeah, I think something that's so special about Tippie and Iowa is that it's such a holistic, well-rounded education. So, you're not just working in things in the business school, which you are learning an incredible amount in the business school that will carry you for a very long time. But you also are able to capitalize on those other experiences, those other courses you've taken, other majors, other minors. And I think that's something that is so unique. And that really allows you to bring a different perspective, and is also something that's super memorable. And I think something that I always just felt so lucky about was during these kind of case interviews or super days or things like that, there are students from Ivy League schools there, from other Big Ten schools there. And I felt like I was absolutely prepared, that I deserved to be there, and that I, was able to show others how special Iowa's education and Tippie's curriculum is. So I just think that's something that you should carry with you proudly.
I love it. Rachel, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say any opportunities that you have to really apply the really fantastic curriculum and knowledge that you're learning in class day to day. I know today there are so many more opportunities to do kind of pro bono consulting projects with nonprofits and small businesses in Iowa City and the surrounding area. And I feel like bringing that real world, so to speak, experience to your interviewer and sharing about that is super great. Personally, I am the biggest fan of applied equity. I think that is the most useful experiential learning class in the finance world, and feel like beyond banking, even translating into fields like consulting, just developing recommendations, sharing those with a board, I think practicing communicating those, and kind of delivering analysis to a target audience was really useful. I know there's some now marketing consulting, experiential learning classes as well. So anytime you have a chance to really practice communicating your findings and analysis, I think is great experience.
Thank you. All right, we're going to wrap it up here. I'm just going to share a couple more resources. Our panelists have generously offered to share their contact information with you all, so please feel free to copy down their email and set up a time to run through some practice cases or schedule time to talk more about their specific experiences with case interviews. And this is being recorded, so if you don't have time to put this down, don't worry about it. It'll be on YouTube. One last resource I will plug is to sign up for Case Coach, which is a platform that my office just purchased for all Tippie students. With it, you can access a wealth of resources and practice rooms to get comfortable with case interviews. You can go to casecoach.com/Tippie and sign up with your Iowa email address. And I appreciate you all so much for being on the webinar. Thank you, the panelists, for participating and sharing some of your wisdom and recommendations. This conversation has been recorded and will be uploaded to Tippie's YouTube page, so you can reference it in the future. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review. And thanks again for joining. Have a great day.